one of the muscles you need to know for our next lab unit. It's not everything that's listed in the lab book. Our first portion is muscles of the head and neck. These numbers should be in the same order as they are on your list. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how the muscles get their names as well. So the first one, epicranius, is here. Now this portion of it is called the frontalis. This little bit back here is also part of it and is called the occipitalis. And then this big aponeurosis connects them. So, muscles in the face have two major functions, chewing and facial expression. The frontalis is one for facial expression. If you look at where the fibers are and how they run, when it contracts, it raises the eyebrows. The name comes from its location directly over the frontal bone. Number two, orbicularis oculi. Okay. Oculi means eye. Think of binoculars. Orbicularis refers to its shape. It is a circle. Actually, that didn't show up very well. Let's try this. Okay. So when a circle contracts, it shrinks. The orbicularis oculi closes your eyes. Similarly, there's an orbicularis oris. Oris for oral, meaning mouth. Think oral hygiene, oral test, and so on. So same effect. The orbicularis oris closes your mouth. If you really tighten it up, it puckers the lips as well. So sometimes it's called the kissing muscle, orbicularis oris. Number four, the buccinator. The buccal region or buccal region is the cheek. Here is the buccinator. And I'm highlighting the direction of fibers. Notice that they run from the jaw towards the mouth and that it's deep to some other muscles. What the buccinator does when you contract it is to tighten the cheeks. So it's sometimes called the trumpeter's muscle. 5 and 6 are the zygomaticus muscles, minor and major. That refers to the size. Minor is the shorter one here. Zygomaticus major is the longer one. The zygomaticus part is they're named for their origin on the zygomatic bone here. Their insertion is the orbicularis oris. Now think about what happens if this contracts. You pull these two areas closer together. That's definitely facial expression. The zygomaticus muscles are for smiling. And remember that the minor is more medial, a little bit superior. There will be some views where you can't really distinguish the size or where it actually looks the reverse just because of the way we're looking at it. Number 7, the platysma. This one is also named for its shape. Plat, like a plate, means flat. The platysma is the superficial muscle going from the upper part of the chest to the mandible. It doesn't pull on the mandible very much. Mostly what it does is pull on the face. In the lab book, there's a picture, and I believe A&P Revealed has some animations that will show you the expression you get. It kind of tenses the neck and pulls the mouth down a little. It's kind of a horrified expression. That's the platysma. Number 8, the masseter. I think that this one is named for its action. Mass, like masticate or to chew. So the masseter is one of 2 chewing muscles you're going to learn. There are a few others that are smaller that we're not worrying about. So the masseter goes from the zygomatic arch to the bottom of the mandible. When it contracts, it elevates the mandible. Very important action in chewing your food. Number 9, the temporalis, is the other muscle of mastication we're doing. It is fanned out here over the temporal bone. So just like frontalis, it's named for its location. Now, you can't quite see because it disappears under the zygomatic arch, but it's going to go down and connect to the coronoid process, or the anterior part of the mandible. The last one on this page is the sternocleidomastoid. That's my favorite muscle because it's so much fun to say once you get the hang of it. Sternocleidomastoid. The name refers to the insertions and origin. So sterno is for the sternum, cleido for the clavicle, and then mastoid for the mastoid process. That is usually actually the insertion. The fibers run here and here. This part attaches to the sternum, this part to the clavicle. It's a little hard to see where things are really going in this view. So the main action is to pull on the mastoid process, and because that's anterior to the occipital condyles, which are the fulcrum for your head as a lever, that's going to pull the chin downward. So if you contract the sternocleidomastoid on one side, it will tilt your head or rotate it. Here's an anterior view of most of the same muscles. So, frontalis on the forehead, orbicularis oculi around the eye, orbicularis oris around the mouth. Buccinator is in there, but hard to see. The 2 zygomaticus muscles here. Now, notice there are several muscles coming up from the orbicularis oris. Zygomaticus are the ones that attach to the zygomatic bone. This muscle, that's too vertical. That's not going to make you smile. It's not one of the zygomaticus muscles. Masseter, vertically around the back of the cheek. Temporalis, you can just see a little of up here. Sternocleidomastoid, you can more clearly see the 2 parts to it. Here's the sternal, and here's the clavicular or cleido portion. Okay, so that is the muscles of the face, and that we can see from the front of the neck. They've removed the platysma from this one. There's one other muscle that's in the back of the neck called the splenius capitis. I'm not sure what the splenius part means because it's nothing to do with the spleen, but the capitis part is here. It attaches to the occipital bone. Splenius capitis helps to extend or hyperextend the neck. Our next section is muscles of the chest, shoulder, and upper limb. The reason these are combined is a lot of chest and shoulder muscles actually act on the humerus. Okay, starting with an anterior view, I've included these intercostal muscles. That means between the ribs. You remember how that cartilage was called costal cartilage. Okay? It is not intercostal. It has nothing to do with the beach. So intercostal muscles between the ribs. The external, you may not be able to see very clearly here, but they are superficial to the internal intercostals. The other difference that you can see is the direction of fibers. The external intercostals angle down and in. The internal intercostals angle down and out. These are breathing muscles. The external intercostals lift the ribs to help you inhale, and the internal intercostals lower the ribs when you want to exhale with more force. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because the pectoralis major is the main superficial chest muscle. It's this entire thing. Okay. When you say somebody has nice pecs, that's short for pectoralis major. And if you look over here, you can see that its insertion is on the humerus. So the pectoralis major is going to pull the arm forward. So flex the shoulder, or it can adduct it if you have your arms out to the side. Deep to the pectoralis major is number 3, the pectoralis minor. It is attached to the coracoid process of the scapula, and then 3 sections come down to 3 of the ribs. And its major job is actually to move the scapula. It can tilt your shoulder forward. Serratus anterior also acts on the scapula. It is attached to the anterior surface, so where the scapula faces the ribs, and then it comes down to 9 ribs, numbers 1 through 9. And it gets its name, serratus, for what it looks like over here where we've left the abdominal muscles in place. It has a serrated edge, okay, because of the way the other muscle weaves between it. The serratus anterior pulls your shoulder forward or protracts it. Number 5, the trapezius, is mostly in the back. You just see a little of it from the front, attached to the clavicle and acromion process of the scapula. And the trapezius actually goes further down the back, and it goes up to the occipital bone. It was removed in the splenius capitis picture. It shows, I'll show it to you on the posterior where you can see more of it. It is a shoulder elevator with a few other actions. And then the last one on here, the deltoid, is the shoulder muscle, named for its triangular shape like the Greek letter delta. Here's the posterior view, trapezius again, okay, so you can see the full shape. On one side, it's a big triangle. I think if you could see them both, it wouldn't really be a trapezoid shape, so I'm not sure where the name comes from. But if your neck and shoulders are tense a lot, that's where it's coming from. Rhomboid, major and minor, these are named for their shape. A rhomboid is a tilted square, basically. So these two muscles that go from the scapula, its medial border, to the spine are the rhomboid, minor, and major. And again, that's for size, but like the zygomaticus, the minor is the one on top. The rhomboids are shoulder retractors. Latissimus dorsi is the large muscle in the lower back. So most of the back is taken up by trapezius and latissimus dorsi. And this is another one that inserts on the humerus. So it's a big flat muscle, and what it does is pull your arms down. You might think, why would I need such a big muscle for that? Well, think about if your arms are up and you want to pull yourself up. So the latissimus dorsi is a climbing muscle. And there's a machine for lifting weights with it called, they call it lat pulls, where you pull your arms down to lift the weights. And then here's the deltoid again, attached to the spine of the scapula, just like the trapezius. The deltoid is going to act mainly on the humerus. It can help rotate it and abduct it. Continuing to the back again, we have muscles on the scapula that are not visible when the trapezius is in place, or there are a little bit down in here, but you see a lot more of them with it removed. Going from top to bottom, they are supraspinatus, meaning above the spine. There's the spine. Infraspinatus, below the spine. It is the widest one at the medial side, but it narrows out into just this small attachment. Teres minor and then teres major. Teres means round. They're round in cross-section. And minor is the smaller one, and again, just like zygomaticus and rhomboid, it is the superior of the two. So these four, plus one on the anterior of the scapula, are what's called the rotator cuff. They all attach to the tubercles of the humerus and are involved in rotation of the arm. So here's another posterior view with everything in place. The shoulders are in a little different position so that you can see a bit more of the rotator cuff muscles. The other thing shown here is the triceps brachii. Okay, so think, where's brachia? The arm. The triceps are on the posterior. We'll have another look at those coming up. So, triceps means 3 heads. You can kind of see 2 parts to it divided there. The third one is kind of underneath and not easy to see in this diagram. Here is the anterior view of the arm. We have deltoid again. This top picture, at least down to the elbow, shows everything. Subscapularis was that last muscle that's on the anterior surface of the scapula and part of the rotator cuff. Biceps brachii. You've probably heard of your biceps and triceps. So the biceps is on the anterior of the arm, and I'm outlining its shape here. I missed a little there. Okay. So some of this down at the bottom is not part of it. Biceps means 2 heads. The triceps muscle extend your elbow. The biceps brachii flexes it. It is helped by the brachialis muscle, which is about half the length but a little wider. When the biceps is in place, you just see a little of the brachialis. Now our left picture at the bottom shows the biceps by itself, so you can see its shape. Here's the subscapularis by itself. You can see its insertion. And now here is the brachialis by itself. So it's shorter but wider. The other thing is the biceps brachii inserts on the radius. The brachialis inserts on the ulna. So they're going to pull on your forearm at different angles in order to help flex it. Okay. That's the upper arm. Here we can see those two upper arm muscles again. And now we're looking at the forearm. Now, there are multiple layers of muscles in the forearm. We're just going to look at the superficial layer. Okay. There's the brachioradialis muscle. That is the most lateral forearm muscle. It actually starts on the humerus, comes down and attaches to the radius. It's really hard to draw with a mouse, sorry. And that is the third muscle for elbow flexion. Now, it also slightly supinates, not all the way. The biceps would supinate all the way to palm up. Brachioradialis takes it just to thumb up, which is where your arm would be if you were holding a drink. And so I've heard this referred to as BR for beer raising muscle. Hardy har. Okay. Just lateral to it and slightly visible are the extensor carpi radialis muscles. There's actually two of them, so they're called longus for the long one and brevis for the short one. They are here. And we lose sight of their tendons, but they're going to go down and actually attach to the carpal muscles, or the carpal bones, but on the posterior. So we'll see them again from the posterior side. So think of it this way. Muscles cannot push. They can only pull. And so in order to extend the wrist, the muscle has to be on the posterior. But it's shown here because we can see it a little bit. On the other side, the medial side, we have a cluster of muscles that are attached to the medial epicondyle of the humerus. Most of them are not going to act on the elbow, they're going to act on the wrist, and that's because they're inserted on the carpal bones. The exception is this first one, the pronator teres, that is here, almost horizontal. So that's going to pronate, turn your palm down. Second is flexor carpi radialis. So that tells you its action. Flex the wrist. Radialis tells us that it inserts near the radial side. So even though its origin is medial, its insertion is lateral. Flexor carpi ulnaris is, I'm going to skip over that. It was easier to put the arrow here. I'm going to stay in order, moving across. Palmaris longus, right here, comes down to the center of the wrist and actually spreads out in an aponeurosis in the palm. It's another wrist flexor. Not everyone has it. You can tell if you do by tensing your wrist. If you have it, you will see two tendons sticking up. Those are the flexor carpi radialis, the one closer to the thumb, and the palmaris longus right in the center. And then the last one across, flexor carpi ulnaris, goes just straight down along the medial side of the arm. This is the one whose tendon contains the pisiform bone, that one sesamoid bone in the carpal group. Okay. So if you follow across the tendons that come down to the wrist, you go brachioradialis, flexor carpi radialis, palmaris longus, flexor carpi ulnaris. We're skipping the pronator teres because it doesn't go all the way down. And finally, the posterior forearm. So again, we can see the triceps brachii at the top. We can just see a little of the brachioradialis here. And then moving across from lateral to medial, the extensor carpi radialis, longus and brevis. So this one up here is longus, brevis is here. And we lose sight of them underneath these little muscles that act on the thumb. But they would come down and attach to the carpals here. In fact, you can just see their tendons. Next is the extensor digitorum. This is a wide muscle with technically 4 tendons. Those go out to the fingers. Okay, I see 4 tendons here, but then there's a 5th that goes just to the pinky. And that is often listed as a separate muscle called the extensor digiti minimi, as in minimal or small, goes to the small digit. Okay? But if you think about the thing Dr. Evil does with sticking his pinky out, there you go. I could also call it the tea drinking muscle. Okay. Then extensor carpi ulnaris, another full-length muscle on the posterior, comes down to the posterior of the carpal bones. Okay. And then we can also see the flexor carpi ulnaris, but it disappears because the tendon goes around to the front. Okay. So flexor carpi ulnaris is the most medial muscle, brachioradialis is the most lateral muscle in the forearm. And that is it for labs 20 and 21.